An elderly woman has her head forcibly shaved by her daughter-in-law while being filmed for social media. The video, posted as a joke, ignites outrage and goes viral across the country. The backlash explodes and reveals secrets that had been buried for years. But it is the victim's own voice that transforms everything into a powerful national movement. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. In the luxurious penthouse of the Eagle's Palace Tower, one of the most imposing buildings overlooking the South Bank in London, the Sunday afternoon silence was broken only by the metallic hum of an electric shaver. Mrs. Evelyn Sterling, at 78 years old, remained motionless in the noble wooden chair brought from the dining room. Her eyes, two deep pools of wisdom and resignation, fixed on a random point on the blue horizon of the Thames estuary that stretched beyond the balcony. "Hold her properly, Melanie. This isn't going to make a good video," commanded Deborah Menzies, Mrs. Evelyn's daughter-in-law and wife of Graham, the elderly woman's only son. The 35-year-old woman, with long, perfectly painted red nails, held the shaver firmly while her friend Melanie Shaw positioned herself beside her, restraining the frail arms of the elderly lady with unnecessary force. "Look at her face. This is going to blow up on social media, girl. We'll easily hit 1 million views," Melanie cackled, adjusting her phone to capture the best angle of the repulsive scene. Mrs. Evelyn's long silver hair, always tied in an elegant bun, now fell in uneven strands onto the marble floor. With each pass of the shaver, more hair accumulated around the chair, forming a grey carpet that contrasted with the apartment's impeccable decor. "Please, my dear, that's enough." "I don't want any more," Mrs. Evelyn murmured, her voice trembling but firm. "My hair, it takes years to grow." Deborah completely ignored the plea, continuing to shave her mother-in-law's scalp while narrating for the camera. "Hey there, TikTok fam. Today Grandma Evelyn is getting a modern makeover. Who hasn't wanted to give their mother-in-law a makeover, right? Comment below." In the corner of the balcony, Josephine, the housekeeper who had served the family for over 2 decades, watched the scene with horror. Her hands clutched the cleaning cloth so tightly that her knuckles turned white. For months she had witnessed the increasingly disrespectful treatment her employer received, but she had never imagined it would come to this. "Mrs. Josephine, come here and film from another angle," Melanie called out, extending another phone to the employee. "People need to see the full transformation." "Excuse me, ma'am, but I need to finish preparing dinner," Josephine replied, her voice strained by indignation and the fear of unemployment. At 52, with 2 children in university and a young granddaughter to support, she couldn't afford to lose this job. However, as she retreated to the kitchen, Josephine discreetly activated the camera on her own phone, hidden in her uniform pocket. The video she was recording would be her secret weapon, her testimony against that violence disguised as fun. In the neighboring apartment, young Edward Sutton, a 22-year-old journalism student, heard the shrill laughter and the buzzing of the machine. Curious, he approached the window and, upon realizing what was happening, felt a wave of revolt rise in his chest. He knew Mrs. Evelyn well from encounters in the elevator and from afternoons when she kindly reviewed his academic papers, always with words of encouragement and fascinating stories from her time as a university professor. Meanwhile, across London, at Sterling Enterprises' central office, Graham Sterling was finishing an important video conference with Chinese investors. At 45, he had transformed the small real estate agency inherited from his father into a construction industry empire with ventures spread across southern England. The price of success, however, was his constant absence from home. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your trust. I will send the revised contracts later today," Graham concluded, ending the call and loosening his tie. He looked at the photo frame on his desk, a picture of his mother, Deborah, and himself, smiling during their wedding anniversary party the previous year. Something stirred within him like a premonition. "Caroline, cancel my afternoon appointments. I need to sort out a personal matter," he told his secretary via intercom. "But sir, the meeting with the housing secretary is scheduled for 4 o'clock, Caroline reminded him. "Reschedule it for tomorrow. Tell them an urgent family matter has come up." In the apartment, the prank continued. Mrs. Evelyn, now with her head completely shaved, maintained the dignity that only decades of life could build. Her expression showed no hatred or revolt, only deep disappointment. "There, now you look like those Tibetan nuns." "Super Zen, Grandma," Deborah exclaimed, spinning the chair so Evelyn could see herself in the living room mirror. The elderly woman finally faced her reflection. The face that stared back seemed more fragile, more exposed. For a brief moment her eyes welled up, but she quickly regained her composure. "Hair grows back, my dear. Dignity once lost is much harder to recover," she said calmly, rising from the chair with difficulty. Melanie stopped recording, visibly disappointed by the lack of dramatic reaction from the elderly woman. "She didn't even cry. This won't be funny at all. Relax, we'll edit it and put some funny music over it. People will go crazy," Deborah replied, already imagining the comments and attention she would receive. The building's elevator arrived at the penthouse floor. Graham rushed out, his premonition growing stronger. As he opened the apartment door, he was met by an eerie silence broken only by suppressed laughter coming from the balcony. "Mum? Deborah?" he called, walking towards the voices. The scene he found froze him in place. His mother, her head completely shaved, sitting in a chair surrounded by hair on the floor. His wife and her friend with phones in their hands and smiles that quickly turned into expressions of surprise. What have you done?" he asked, his voice almost fading in shock. "Darling!" "You're home early!" Deborah tried to cover up, quickly hiding her phone. "We were just making a fun video for my channel. Your mother agreed, didn't she, Mrs. Evelyn?" Before the elderly woman could respond, Josephine emerged from the kitchen, still secretly recording on her phone. "That's not true. Mr. Graham," the housekeeper said, gathering all her courage. Mrs. Evelyn asked them to stop several times. They held her in the chair when she tried to get up. Time seemed to freeze on that sunny South Bank balcony. The sound of waves breaking on the beach, dozens of floors below, seemed deafening in the silence that followed. Graham looked at his mother, then at his wife, and again at the hair scattered on the floor. At that moment, something fundamental broke inside him, something that all the money or corporate success in the world couldn't fix. Graham remained silent, his tense jaw betraying the storm of emotions that consumed him. His eyes, fixed on the silver strands scattered across the balcony floor, reflected more than anger. There was a deep pain, a belated understanding of the abyss that had opened in his own home while he was building empires across London. "Get out of here," he finally said, with a calm that was more terrifying than any shout. "Melanie, pack your things and leave my house now." Deborah's friend, realizing the gravity of the situation, hastily grabbed her bag and headed for the elevator without looking back, the sound of her heels echoing on the marble like a prelude to a stampede. "Darling, you're overreacting," Deborah tried, approaching with a nervous smile. "It was just a prank for TikTok. The internet loves this kind of content. It would really help my work as an influencer." Graham finally lifted his eyes from the floor and faced his wife. There was something different in his gaze, as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Prank? You call this a prank?" His voice rose just enough to carry the weight of disappointment. "Humiliating my mother, a woman almost 80 years old, to get likes on the internet." Mrs. Evelyn, who remained seated with dignity despite the violence she had suffered, slowly stood up. Her hands, marked by time, adjusted a scarf over her newly shaved head. "Son, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do, Mum," Graham interrupted, gently holding the elderly woman's hands. "This is not normal. This is not acceptable." Deborah, realizing she was losing control of the situation, changed tactics. Tears began to well in her eyes, carefully calculated to appear genuine. "I just wanted to create different content. You never understood my work as a digital influencer. You're always too busy with the company to support me." "Don't try to twist the situation," Graham cut her off. "The video. I want you to delete that video now." Deborah hesitated, biting her lower lip. "It was automatically published. There's an app that— delete it, now." The order came with a look that brooked no argument. With trembling fingers, Deborah picked up her phone and opened the app. After a few taps on the screen, she showed it to her husband. "There, deleted. Satisfied?" In the corner of the room, Josephine watched the scene, her phone still discreetly recording in her uniform pocket. She knew Deborah's type well. She knew the young employer had probably saved the video elsewhere. "Mrs. Evelyn needs to rest," Graham said, gently leading his mother towards her bedroom. "Josephine, please prepare some tea for her." The housekeeper nodded and headed to the kitchen, finally stopping the recording. The file she now possessed would be her guarantee, her small share of justice in that story. When she returned to the living room after taking tea to Mrs. Evelyn, she found Graham and Deborah in a subdued but intense argument. "I don't know who you are," Graham was saying, his voice low but laden with disappointment. "I thought I had married someone who shared my values, who respected my family." "I do respect your family," Deborah protested. "It was a mistake, I admit. But you're turning this into unnecessary drama." "Unnecessary?" Graham took a deep breath as if gathering strength. "When we got married, you said you would be a companion for my mother in my absences, that you would care for her as if she were your own mother. And I do. Do you think it's easy to deal with an elderly woman who lives in the past, criticizing my clothes, my lifestyle?" Josephine, who was trying to pass unnoticed, couldn't suppress a gasp of indignation. Mrs. Evelyn never criticized anyone. On the contrary, it was always she who defended Deborah when Graham questioned his wife's excessive spending or her absences from important family events. "You have 1 hour to pack your things," Graham finally said, removing his wedding ring from his finger. The small gold circle, which for 5 years had symbolized a union, now seemed merely a meaningless object in his palm. "I don't want you in this house." "You can't be serious," Deborah paled. "You're going to kick me out because of a stupid video?" "It's not about the video," Graham replied, placing the ring on the coffee table. "It's about what it reveals about you, about us, about what we've become." From the bedroom, Mrs. Evelyn's voice was heard calling for Josephine. The housekeeper hurried away, leaving the couple to resolve their issues. "Josephine," the elderly woman said when the employee entered the elegantly decorated bedroom, "you still have the video on your phone, don't you?" The housekeeper hesitated, surprised by her employer's perceptiveness. "Yes, Mrs. Evelyn, I recorded everything. To prove you didn't consent to that." Mrs. Evelyn nodded, her eyes showing a clarity that contrasted with her body's apparent fragility. "I know. I heard the sound when you turned on the camera. I've always had good hearing." A small smile appeared on her lips. "Keep that video, but don't share it." "Not yet. You don't want to report it." "There are times when justice needs to run its own course," she replied enigmatically. "Now I need you to contact someone for me." "Without my son knowing?" Josephine approached, curious. In all her years working for the Sterling family, she had never seen her employer ask for something in secret. "My granddaughter Louisa, Graham's daughter from his first marriage." The revelation caught Josephine by surprise. "Mr. Graham has a daughter, but he never mentioned—" "There are many unhealed wounds in this family," Mrs. Evelyn sighed. "Louisa grew up away from her father after the divorce. She tried to reconnect a few times, but Deborah always made things difficult. Now perhaps is the right time for a fresh start." In the living room, the argument continued with an increasingly definitive tone. "You'll regret this, Graham," Deborah threatened, already dragging suitcases through the room. "I have a lot to say about you and your company." "Say what you want," he replied with surprising serenity. "There's nothing you can say that's worse than what I just witnessed today." Meanwhile, in the neighboring apartment, young Edward was sitting in front of his computer, the cursor blinking over the publish button of his independent journalism blog. The title of the article he had just written read, "Cruelty on Social Media, When the Search for Likes Dehumanizes the Elderly." He hesitated. Publishing what he had witnessed through the window would expose a private situation. On the other hand, wasn't that precisely the role of journalism? To denounce abuse, to give a voice to those who had been silenced? His hand slowly moved the mouse, and after a deep sigh, he clicked Publish. The article, which did not mention names but described in detail the scene he had witnessed, went live at 7:43 p.m. that Sunday night. In less than an hour, it had already been shared in groups advocating for elder rights. In 2 hours, it went viral on Twitter with the hashtag #RespectOurElders. What no one could have predicted was that in Melanie's apartment, Deborah's friend kept a copy of the original video. And that, driven by a mixture of envy and opportunism, she was about to send that file to a news portal with a large audience on the British internet. in the Sterling penthouse, as Deborah left for the night with 2 designer suitcases and a face marked by tears of rage, Graham sat on the edge of his mother's bed. "I'm so sorry," he said, holding the elderly woman's wrinkled hand. "I should have been more present. I should have noticed what was happening." Mrs. Evelyn smiled tenderly. "Son, you can't be everywhere at once. Don't blame yourself." "How can I not blame myself? I let them turn my home into a horror show while I accumulated money and power." The elderly woman adjusted herself in bed, the white scarf over her shaved head giving her an almost ethereal appearance. "It's never too late to start over," she said softly. "And perhaps this is the time to bring back into our lives someone who should have been with us for a long time." Graham frowned, confused. "What are you talking about, Mum?" Before Mrs. Evelyn could answer, Graham's phone rang. On the screen, the name of the company's communications director flashed insistently. As he answered, his expression transformed from confusion to horror. "What do you mean, viral? What video? Where?" On the other end of the line, words like image crisis, negative repercussions, and official statement came like successive blows. The director explained that a video showing Deborah and a friend forcibly shaving an elderly woman's head was circulating on social media, and that internet users had already identified the Sterling family as the protagonists of that degrading scene. The digital world, with its relentless speed and instant judgment, was beginning to crumble around them. What had started as a prank to generate likes was about to turn into a national nightmare. Monday morning dawned with the London sky covered in heavy clouds, as if nature itself reflected the storm brewing on British social media. In apartment 1201 of the Palm Haven building in Canary Wharf, Deborah woke up on her friend Patricia's sofa, her eyes swollen and her phone beeping incessantly. "My God, what is this?" she murmured, unlocking the screen and immediately being bombarded with notifications. Messages from friends, comments on her social media, alerts of mentions in news reports. Everything pointed in one direction. The video was everywhere. Patricia entered the room with 2 cups of coffee, her expression heavy with worry. "Friend, have you seen what's happening? It's on all the news sites." With trembling fingers, Deborah opened her phone's browser. The headline of the country's largest news portal jumped out at her. "Elder abuse. Video shows influencer forcibly shaving mother-in-law's hair." Just below, her own frozen image holding the shaver, with a smile that now seemed cruel and distorted. "It's not possible," she whispered, feeling the blood drain from her face. "I deleted the video. How—" "It was Melanie," Patricia said, sitting next to her friend. "She called me last night completely hysterical. Said she sold the video to BBC News Online for a hefty sum." "She what?" Deborah jumped up, spilling coffee on the imported rug. "That viper. After everything I did for her. I paid her bills, lent her clothes, introduced her to my contacts. She said it was a business opportunity," Patricia replied, making air quotes with her fingers. "And that you would do the same in her place." The phone continued to beep non-stop. A specific notification caught Deborah's attention. A message from her publicist. "Urgent. All brands have cancelled contracts. Call me now." In less than 12 hours, the entire digital empire Deborah had built over 5 years crumbled like a sandcastle. Her 800,000 Instagram followers, contracts with luxury brands, invitations to exclusive events, everything turned to dust before the relentless tribunal of public opinion. In the Sterling penthouse, the situation was no less chaotic. Graham had spent the entire night on the phone, in a desperate attempt to contain the damage. The emergency public relations firm worked at full throttle to draft an official statement, while lawyers discussed the legal implications of the case. Mrs. Evelyn, contrary to all expectations, maintained an almost supernatural serenity. Sitting in her favorite armchair, with an elegant white turban covering her shaved head, she calmly leafed through a book of poems by Carol Ann Duffy. "Mum, shouldn't you be resting?" Graham asked, briefly interrupting a tense call with the legal department. "I'm fine, son. Don't worry about me," she replied with a serene smile. "There are more important things to resolve now." Josephine entered the room carrying breakfast on a silver tray. Her eyes avoided meeting Graham's. The weight of the secret she carried both the video on her phone and the contact with the unknown granddaughter. Weighed on her conscience. Mr. Graham. There are people downstairs, journalists. Many, the housekeeper informed him, placing the tray on the table. The doorman said he can't contain them. Graham ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. That's all we needed. I'll have to make a statement? No, Mrs. Evelyn intervened with surprising firmness. I will. No way, Graham protested. You shouldn't expose yourself to this circus. You've been through enough trauma. The elderly woman stood up, adjusting her turban with elegance. In her movements there was a determination that did not match the apparent fragility of her body. Son, understand one thing. This story will only end when it is told by the right person. And that person is me. Before Graham could argue, the intercom rang. It was the building's security guard, informing that a young woman insisted on coming up, claiming to be a relative of the family. I didn't authorize any visitors, Graham replied. Confused. She says she's your daughter, sir. Louisa Sterling. Time seemed to freeze at that instant. Graham paled, instinctively looking at his mother, who merely nodded with a small smile. Let her up, he finally ordered, hanging up the intercom and turning to Mrs. Evelyn. You knew about this. You called her? There are moments in life, my son, when we need to gather the broken pieces of the past to build a better future, the elderly woman replied enigmatically. The sound of the doorbell cut the tension in the room. Graham hesitated for a few seconds before walking to the door and opening it. Before him stood a 23-year-old woman, with the same hazel eyes he saw every morning in the mirror. Louisa wore jeans, a simple t-shirt, and carried a small backpack. Her dark hair, cut at shoulder length, framed a face that carried a mixture of apprehension and determination. Hi, Dad, she said simply, her voice slightly trembling. Graham felt the impact of that word, Dad, hit him like a wave. How long had he dreamed of hearing it again? 10 years more? Louisa's was all he could say, his voice choked with emotion. The young woman timidly entered the apartment, looking around as if trying to recognize a place visited only in dreams. I came as soon as Grandma called, she explained, addressing the elderly woman who watched the scene with tear-filled eyes. I saw the video on social media this morning and could barely believe it. Is everything all right, Grandma? Mrs. Evelyn opened her arms, and Louisa ran into her embrace like a small child seeking protection. The reunion, charged with emotion, contrasted with the digital chaos spreading across the country that morning. I'm fine. My dear, the elderly woman replied, caressing her granddaughter's face. Now that you're here, I'm even better. Graham watched the scene, paralyzed between the emotion of reuniting with his daughter and the confusion of how it had all happened. His memories returned to the painful divorce, the custody battles, and the gradual distance that had grown between him and Louisa, especially after his marriage to Deborah. How did you know? He finally asked. Grandma called me last night, Louisa explained, still hugging her grandmother. And this morning, when I woke up, I saw the video everywhere. I couldn't stay away. Not this time. Outside the building, the crowd of journalists and curious onlookers grew by the minute. Social media was buzzing with comments, analyses, and judgments. A new hashtag gained traction on Twitter. Respect for elders. Meanwhile, in Patricia's apartment, Deborah stared at the open laptop on the kitchen counter. On the screen, an email from her lawyer warned of possible lawsuits for elder abuse, moral damages, and other legal developments of the case. I need to do something, she murmured, running her hands over her face. An apology video? An official statement? I don't know if it will help, Patricia replied sincerely. The damage is already done. I have to try. Deborah hit the table hard. I spent 5 years building my image. I won't let a single video destroy everything. With trembling hands, she opened her phone's camera app and started recording. Tears, now genuine, streamed down her face as she rehearsed an apology that sounded more like a justification. I never intended. It was just a prank. I love my mother-in-law. I am deeply sorry. In the Sterling penthouse, another video was being produced, but unlike Deborah's calculated tears, this one carried Mrs. Evelyn's serene dignity. Sitting in her armchair with her white turban carefully arranged, she spoke directly into the camera that Louisa held. My name is Evelyn Sterling. I'm 78 years old and a retired professor from University College London. Yesterday, I was a victim of an act that many would call violence or humiliation. My hair was shaved against my will to serve as content for social media. Her voice, firm and clear, carried no resentment, only a quiet wisdom that captivated those who listened. I am not here to condemn or ask for punishment. I am here to invite reflection. At what point did we allow the search for digital validation to surpass our basic sense of humanity? When did the value of a human being start to be measured in likes and shares? Graham watched the recording with a mixture of admiration and astonishment. His mother, who had always avoided the spotlight and public exposure, now spoke with the eloquence of someone who had spent her entire life preparing for that moment. "Hair will grow back," Mrs. Evelyn continued. "But what about respect and dignity? How do we recover values that seem increasingly rare in our society, obsessed with appearances and instant approval?" At the end of the recording, she smiled serenely. "From today, I will wear this white turban with pride. Not to hide my shaved head, but to transform it into a symbol of resistance against dehumanization, against the culture of discarding the elderly, against the trivialization of cruelty." Louisa lowered her phone, her eyes welling up with emotion. "Grandma, that was incredible." "Now," Mrs. Evelyn said, turning to Graham and Louisa, "it's time to send this message to the world and start rebuilding our family." At that moment, as Mrs. Evelyn's video was sent to a trusted family journalist, Deborah received the notification that confirmed her worst fears. Her apology video, instead of easing the situation, had been met with even more public indignation. The comments were merciless, accusing her of victimhood and insincerity. The digital storm that had begun as a small prank was now turning into a national hurricane, reshaping relationships, revealing hidden truths, and forcing all involved to face the reflection of their own choices. 48 hours. That's how long it took for Mrs. Evelyn's video to spread like wildfire across the United Kingdom. What began as a message sent to a single journalist transformed into a national phenomenon. From the BBC to ITV, from The Guardian to Sky News, from WhatsApp groups to pub discussions, everyone was talking about the lady in the white turban. The elegance and dignity with which she approached the subject contrasted with the cruelty of the original video, creating a narrative that captured the collective imagination. Soon, women of all ages began posting photos wearing white turbans in solidarity, with the hashtag #NoiWhiteTurban reaching the top of trending topics. In the Sterling apartment, the doorbell wouldn't stop ringing. Invitations for interviews, television programs, university lectures. Everyone wanted to hear Mrs. Evelyn in person. "It's incredible," commented Louisa, who had decided to stay with her grandmother and father indefinitely. "You've become a national symbol overnight." Mrs. Evelyn, sitting at the breakfast table with her inseparable white turban, smiled serenely. "It wasn't overnight, my dear. It was 78 years of building character. The world just took a while to notice." Graham entered the room with his phone in hand, his expression divided between pride and concern. "Mum, Panorama wants to do an exclusive interview with you on Sunday. Live in prime time." The elderly woman took a sip of her tea before responding. "And what do you think about that, son?" "I think it's an opportunity to further amplify your message," he replied sincerely. "But I also think you shouldn't feel obligated to anything. You've been through enough stress." "Stress?" Mrs. Evelyn laughed softly. "Graham, you still don't understand. What happened to me was terrible, yes. But it was also an opportunity to talk about something that usually remains hidden in the shadows, how we treat our elderly." Louisa, who watched the scene with growing admiration for her grandmother, interjected, "Grandma's right, Dad, this has already transcended our family. It's become a cause." The businessman looked at his daughter, still marveling at her presence in that house after so many years. In a few days, Louisa had integrated into the family routine as if she had never left. Her immediate connection with Mrs. Evelyn, the ease with which she assumed the role of mediator between the family and the press, the maturity with which she handled the entire situation, all of this filled Graham's heart with a pride he had never imagined feeling. "You're right," he finally agreed. "I'll confirm the interview." While the Sterling family found a new balance amidst the media storm, Deborah faced a very different reality. Now staying in a luxury hotel in Notting Hill, her last refuge after her friendship with Patricia, deteriorated amidst the tensions of recent days. She watched, powerless her own downfall. Another 50,000 followers lost today alone, she murmured to herself, observing the plummeting numbers on her Instagram profile. The brands that once vied for her image now issued official statements distancing themselves from her. Invitations to events dried up. Influencer friends disappeared. In 1 week, Deborah had gone from digital celebrity to social pariah. Her name was now synonymous with cruelty and superficiality. Memes multiplied, criticism didn't cease, and every attempt to explain herself only worsened the situation. Her phone rang, interrupting her gloomy thoughts. It was her lawyer. "Deborah, we have a problem. The building's security camera footage has been leaked. It clearly shows Mrs. Evelyn trying to get up several times during the incident. This complicates our defense significantly." "Damn it," she exclaimed, throwing a cushion against the wall. "It's a conspiracy. Everyone against me." "Look," the lawyer continued in a tired voice, "I'll be honest. Your best option now is to try to settle. Publicly admit your mistake. Offer substantial compensation. Perhaps even do volunteer work with the elderly." "Are you crazy? That would be admitting guilt." "Deborah," the lawyer's tone hardened, "you are guilty. There are videos, witnesses, material evidence. The question is no longer whether you will be found guilty, but how much it will cost to minimize the damages." After hanging up, Deborah threw herself onto the bed, finally allowing the reality of her situation to hit her full force. The tears that now streamed down her face were no longer calculated for cameras or followers. They were genuine, born of deep despair and the belated recognition of the magnitude of her mistakes. On Sunday night, the UK stopped to watch Mrs. Evelyn's interview on Panorama. The audience ratings broke historical records. Dressed with discreet elegance, her white turban carefully arranged on her head, the elderly woman spoke with the quiet wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to distinguish the essential from the superfluous. "I don't believe in coincidences," she told the presenter. "If all this happened, it was for a reason, perhaps to remind us that behind every wrinkle there is a story. That white hair is a crown earned with time. That growing old is not ceasing to exist. It is existing with more experience." When asked about forgiveness, Mrs. Evelyn surprised everyone. Forgiving doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means freeing oneself from the weight of resentment. "My daughter-in-law made a serious mistake, motivated by distorted values. But condemning is not my role. Educating, yes." The camera showed Graham and Louisa in the audience, both visibly moved. The presenter, seizing the moment, asked the young woman to talk about reuniting with her family after so many years. "It was like coming home after a long journey," Louisa replied with teary eyes. "It took me a long time to understand that adult disputes shouldn't have kept me away from the people I love. Today I know that family isn't just who is present every day, but who remains in your heart even when distant." At the Notting Hill Hotel, Deborah watched the interview with a lump in her throat. Seeing Graham and Louisa together, the clear connection between father and daughter, the young woman's instant acceptance into that family, all of it was like salt in her open wounds. For years she had systematically worked to keep Louisa away, fearing losing her prominent place in her husband's life. Now, ironically, it was she who was out, excluded not only from that family, but from the entire universe of privileges and attention she had so carefully built. "Do you have plans for the future?" the presenter now asked Mrs. Evelyn. "Yes, I do," the elderly woman replied with a serene smile. "Tomorrow we will start a project. We are opening the doors of our home for weekly meetings with seniors in the community. A space to share stories, experiences, and most importantly, to teach younger generations that growing old is a privilege, not a sentence." The presenter, visibly touched, couldn't help but ask a personal question. "And you truly hold no resentment? After everything you've been through?" Mrs. Evelyn adjusted her white turban with delicate gestures before responding. "My dear, resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I prefer to transform this experience into something positive. Look around. How many women have adopted this turban as a symbol of solidarity? How many important discussions about respect for the elderly have been initiated? This is worth more than any revenge." The interview ended with an image that would be etched in the collective British memory. Mrs. Evelyn, Graham and Louisa holding hands, walking along Brighton Beach at sunset. 3 generations united by love that survived life's storms. In the days that followed, the white turban movement gained national proportions. Schools promoted debates on digital ethics and respect for the elderly. Universities organized lectures on disposable culture versus permanent values. Bills on the protection of the dignity of older persons gained traction in Parliament. Meanwhile, at the Notting Hill Hotel, Deborah made the most difficult decision of her life. After sleepless nights and painful conversations with herself, she finally recognized that there were no shortcuts to redemption. No apology video, no official statement, no public relations strategy would solve what only concrete actions could transform. With trembling hands, she typed a message to Graham, the first direct communication since their separation. "I need to speak with Mrs. Evelyn, in person. No cameras, no publicity. Just her and me, please." The reply took hours to arrive, increasing her anxiety. When her phone finally vibrated, the message was short and direct. "Tomorrow, 3 p.m. she agreed to see you." That night, for the first time in many years, Deborah cried herself to sleep. They weren't tears of self-pity or anger. They were tears of someone who, for the first time, confronted the magnitude of her mistakes and, simultaneously, glimpsed the possibility of redemption. The next morning, as she prepared for the meeting that could define her future, she looked long at her reflection in the mirror. Her swollen eyes, the absence of makeup, the deep, dark circles, everything revealed a woman different from the one who had so long lived only for appearances. "Who are you?" she asked her reflection. "Who are you really beneath all these filters?" The answer, she knew, would not come from likes or comments. It would have to be built, day after day, choice after choice, away from the spotlights that had so long defined her identity. The path to redemption would be long, but the first step, the genuine recognition of error, was already being taken. Meanwhile, in the Sterling penthouse, Mrs. Evelyn adjusted her white turban in front of the mirror. Beside her, Louisa watched her grandmother with admiration. "Are you sure you want to receive her?" the young woman asked, concerned. "Absolutely," the elderly woman replied serenely. "Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild their story, my dear. Even those who hurt us. What if it's just another strategy to clean up her image?" Mrs. Evelyn smiled, adjusting the white fabric that had now become part of her identity one last time. "Her intentions are hers. Compassion is my choice." In the living room, Graham waited tensely, constantly checking his watch. In a few minutes, he would be face to face with the woman who had betrayed his trust in the cruelest way. The woman who, ironically, had been the unwitting instrument for his daughter's return to his life. The intercom rang, announcing Deborah's arrival. The tension in the apartment was palpable. No one could predict what would happen in that meeting, but everyone felt, in some way, that it would be a decisive moment not only for Deborah, but for everyone involved in that story that had captured the attention of an entire country. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the penthouse, seeming more intense than usual. Josephine, nervously arranging snacks on the silver tray, gave Graham a questioning look. "You can open it," he authorized, instinctively adjusting his tie, as if he were about to face a business meeting and not an encounter with the woman who, until a few days ago, had been his wife. When the door opened, the figure who entered surprised everyone. Deborah, always impeccably dressed and made up, now appeared simple, almost unrecognizable. She wore jeans, a basic white t-shirt, and her hair was tied in an unpretentious ponytail. Her face, free of makeup, revealed deep dark circles and a pallor that betrayed sleepless nights. "Good afternoon," she murmured, her voice devoid of her usual confidence. The silence that followed was dense, laden with memories and contradictory emotions. Graham merely nodded, unable to find appropriate words for the situation. "Mrs. Evelyn is on the balcony," he finally informed her, indicating the way Deborah knew so well. The former influencer walked slowly through the apartment, feeling like a stranger in what had been her home. On the balcony, Mrs. Evelyn sat in her favorite armchair, the white turban contrasting with the blue of the sky and the sea in the background. Louisa was beside her, with a clearly protective expression. "Hello, Deborah," the elderly woman greeted in a serene voice, gesturing to the empty chair in front of her. "Please sit." Deborah obeyed, her eyes briefly meeting Louisa's. The recognition was immediate. The girl she had systematically alienated from Graham's life was now there, integrated into the family, occupying the space she herself had lost. "Louisa," she said with a timid nod. "It's been a while." 9 years, the young woman replied dryly. "Since you convinced my father I was better off away from him." Mrs. Evelyn gently placed her hand on her granddaughter's arm. "Louisa, dear, could you give us a few minutes alone?" The young woman hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her grandmother alone with Deborah. "It's all right," the elderly woman assured with a calm smile. "Sometimes certain conversations need to happen between just two people." After a last suspicious glance in Deborah's direction, Louisa stood up and went to the living room, where her father paced back and forth, consumed by anxiety. On the balcony, silence reigned again. The sound of waves breaking on Brighton Beach, dozens of floors below, seemed amplified. "Thank you for receiving me," Deborah finally began, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve your attention after what I did." Mrs. Evelyn watched her intently, her wise eyes scanning every detail of the woman transformed by public humiliation. "Why did you come, Deborah?" she asked directly. The question, though expected, caught the ex-influencer by surprise. She had rehearsed an elaborate apology all night, but now, faced with her mother-in-law's piercing gaze, all the planned words seemed empty and insufficient. Her voice faltered. "I came to ask for forgiveness, but I know there's no forgiveness for what I did." "And why did you do it?" Mrs. Evelyn insisted, her voice neither accusatory nor sympathetic, just genuinely curious. Deborah took a deep breath, facing for the first time the question she had avoided during all those stormy days. "I don't know," she finally admitted, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Or rather, yes, I do. I did it because I wanted attention. Because I measured my worth in likes and views for so long that I forgot what truly matters. Because I became so obsessed with my public image that I lost my sense of humanity." The confession, raw and unprotected, hung in the air between them. Mrs. Evelyn did not respond immediately. Her gaze drifted to the ocean, as if seeking wisdom in the deep waters of the Atlantic. "You know, Deborah," she finally began, "when you joined our family, I had hopes. I saw in you an intelligent woman, full of energy, capable of bringing joy to my son's life. And for a while, that's exactly what happened." Deborah wiped away her tears, surprised by those unexpectedly kind words. "But then," the elderly woman continued, "something changed. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, almost imperceptible. First, it was just the phone always in hand. Then conversations you interrupted to check notifications, family meals sacrificed for photo shoots, real life constantly edited to look perfect on social media." "I didn't notice," Deborah murmured. "No one notices," Mrs. Evelyn replied with a sigh. "It's like a silent disease. It takes up space, it reconfigures values, it distorts priorities, until one day you wake up and no longer recognize the person in the mirror." In the living room, Graham and Louisa listened to the conversation in silence, both deeply touched by the wisdom with which Mrs. Evelyn handled that delicate moment. "What hurt me wasn't the shaved hair," the elderly woman continued, gently touching the white turban. "It was seeing on your face, on the face of the woman my son chose to share his life with, genuine joy in humiliating me. As if my dignity was worth less than a few minutes of digital fame." The words hit Deborah like physical blows. Each sentence exposed truths she had deliberately ignored. Each observation illuminated dark corners of her behavior she preferred to keep in the shadows. "I lost myself," she admitted, sobbing openly now. "I lost myself so much that I did things I never imagined I was capable of. I'm not asking you to trust me again or to take me back. I know it's impossible. I just wanted you to know that I am truly sorry, and that no matter what happens, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be better." Mrs. Evelyn watched her for long seconds, assessing the sincerity of those words. "True repentance is not measured in tears or promises," she finally said. "It's measured in actions, in real changes in behavior, in daily choices that reflect new values." "I know," Deborah replied, wiping her face. "That's why I've made some decisions. I'm going to deactivate all my social media. I'm going to therapy and I accepted an invitation to volunteer at an elderly care home in Islington. The last piece of information surprised Mrs. Evelyn, who raised her eyebrows. It was my lawyer's idea initially, Deborah admitted honestly, part of the image repair strategy. But when I visited the place, something changed inside me. Those elderly people, many abandoned by their families, it made me think about what I did to you, what I was about to become. In the living room, Graham and Louisa exchanged surprised glances. There was a sincerity in Deborah's voice that neither of them expected to find. I understand, Mrs. Evelyn said after a few moments of reflection. And what about Graham and Louisa? What do you expect from them? Deborah lowered her eyes, the question clearly touching a sensitive point. I expect nothing, she replied in an almost inaudible voice. I know I destroyed my marriage with my own hands. And as for Louisa, she hesitated, searching for the right words. I owe her more apologies than it would be possible to express. I did everything I could to keep her away out of pure selfishness, for fear of losing my place in Graham's life. On the other side of the door, Louisa felt a lump in her throat. For years she had blamed her father for the estrangement, never suspecting Deborah's manipulative influence behind the scenes. Now I see that they needed each other, Deborah continued, that I deprived both of them of a relationship that could have been beautiful. It's another mistake for which I can never adequately compensate them. Mrs. Evelyn nodded slowly, processing everything she heard. There was a long way between words of repentance and concrete actions of change, she knew well. But she also knew how to recognize when a person was genuinely willing to tread that path. Deborah, she finally said, I cannot speak for my son or my granddaughter. Your relationships with them will have to be rebuilt, or not, according to each one's choices. But I can speak for myself. The ex-influencer looked up, apprehensive. I forgive you, the elderly woman declared with simplicity. 3 words. Just 3 words, spoken without fanfare, without conditions, without dramatization. But the impact on Deborah was overwhelming. A sob escaped her throat, followed by deep, almost primal crying. The crying of someone who, for the first time, confronts the magnitude of her errors and simultaneously glimpses the possibility of redemption. In the living room, Graham and Louisa remained silent, each absorbed in their own thoughts and emotions. The scene they witnessed was too powerful to be interrupted with words. Thank you, Deborah finally managed to say, when her crying subsided. I don't deserve... Forgiveness isn't something you deserve, Mrs. Evelyn interrupted gently. It's a gift. What we do with that gift, that's what determines our worth. The conversation continued for some time, gradually taking on a lighter tone. Deborah spoke about her plans for the future, including a gerontology course she intended to start the following semester. Mrs. Evelyn listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering advice or words of encouragement. When the ex-influencer finally stood to leave, she felt simultaneously exhausted and renewed. The weight she carried had not completely disappeared. She knew the consequences of her actions would accompany her for a long time. But for the first time in weeks, she could breathe without feeling that constant oppression in her chest. May I ask one last thing? She asked already at the balcony door. Of course, Mrs. Evelyn replied. How do you do it? How can you so easily forgive someone who caused you so much harm? The elderly woman smiled, adjusting the white turban that now symbolized much more than a shaved head. It wasn't easy, she admitted. But with age, we learn that holding a grudge is like carrying a heavy suitcase on a journey that is already too short. Forgiving is freeing yourself, not the other person. Deborah nodded, absorbing that wisdom. With a final thank you, she walked towards the living room where Graham and Louisa waited. The encounter between the three was brief and uncomfortable. None of the wounds between them could be healed with a single conversation. But when Deborah finally left the apartment, something had changed in the air. Guy tension had dissipated, replaced by a tenuous but real possibility that new paths could be forged from there. On the balcony, Mrs. Evelyn watched the sunset over the Thames estuary, its vibrant colors painting the London sky. Louisa joined her, sitting in the chair Deborah had just vacated. You really forgave her? The young woman asked, still processing everything she had witnessed. Yes, the elderly woman replied simply. Not for her, but for myself. Because holding grudges only poisons the soul of those who carry them. Louisa reflected on those words, thinking about her own resentments accumulated over the years. The estrangement from her father, the lost opportunities, the birthdays celebrated from a distance. "I think I have a lot to learn from you," she finally admitted. Mrs. Evelyn smiled, extending her hand to hold her granddaughter's. "And I from you, my dear. Each generation has its wisdom to share." Graham joined them, bringing a tray with tea. The three sat in silence, contemplating the natural spectacle unfolding on the horizon. The family, once fragmented by misunderstandings and absences, now reunited again, stronger and wiser. At the Notting Hill Hotel, Deborah prepared to leave London. Her luggage, much smaller than usual, contained only the essentials. She had decided to spend some time at her parents' house in Manchester, a return to her origins that, she hoped, could help her reconnect with long-forgotten values. Before leaving, she looked at her phone one last time. Instagram, which was once an extension of her being, now seemed a strange, almost alien object. With a few taps, she accessed the settings and selected the option, "Deactivate account temporarily." A confirmation message appeared. "Are you sure? Your followers will miss you." Deborah hesitated only a second before confirming. The era of filters, appearances, external validation had ended. A new chapter was beginning, more authentic, more difficult, but infinitely more real. In the Sterling penthouse, the phone rang. It was the production team of This Morning on ITV. They wanted to do a special report on the white turban movement, which was now spreading across the country, inspiring initiatives to value and respect the elderly. "What do you think, Mum?" Graham asked his mother after hanging up. Mrs. Evelyn smiled, watching Louisa playing with a white scarf, trying to replicate her grandmother's turban. "I think some stories need to be told," she replied serenely, "not out of vanity or fame, but for the good they can do by being shared." The next morning, as Deborah boarded her flight to Manchester, leaving behind the life of glamour and superficiality she had built, Mrs. Evelyn prepared for another interview. This time, however, she would not be alone. Beside her, wearing white turbans identical to hers, would be Graham and Louisa, three generations united not only by blood, but by a new understanding of what truly constitutes family ties. The story that had begun with an act of cruelty was now transforming into a powerful movement of awareness and respect. The symbol of the white turban, born of humiliation, became an emblem of resistance, dignity, and wisdom. And on social media, where it all began, a new hashtag gained traction, "A New Beginnings Possible." 6 months had passed since that fateful afternoon in the Sterling penthouse. The London winter, always mild, now gave way to spring, bringing with it the promise of renewal inherent in the season. In the spacious hall of the Brighton Beach Senior Community Centre, Mrs. Evelyn carefully adjusted the projector. Her hair, now a few inches long, formed a delicate silver crown, but the white turban remained a conscious choice, no longer a necessity, but a symbol. "Grandma, do you need help?" Louisa asked, entering the room with a tray of homemade cookies. "Everything's under control, dear," the elderly woman replied with a smile. "Just checking if everything's ready for the presentation." The venue was decorated with colourful posters announcing that afternoon's event. White Turban Project, 6 months of history. On the walls, photos documented the various activities developed during that period. Discussion circles between young and old, storytelling workshops, computer classes where roles were reversed, grandchildren teaching grandparents to navigate the digital world safely and consciously. What began as a response to an act of humiliation had transformed into a national movement valuing the wisdom of elders. The project, initially funded by the Sterling family, now received support from companies, universities, and public authorities, expanding to other British cities. "The guests have started to arrive," as Graham announced, entering the room briskly. His face, once constantly tense from corporate commitments, now displayed a serenity that surprised those who had known him only as the relentless CEO of Sterling Enterprises. In recent months, he had completely reorganized his priorities. He had delegated some of his executive responsibilities, reduced his working hours, and for the first time in years, allowed himself to enjoy life beyond financial reports and board meetings. The reconnection with Louisa had been fundamental in this transformation. Father and daughter, after years of forced distance, rediscovered each other with an intensity that surprised both of them. The wounds of the past, though not completely healed, no longer bled as before. "I'll greet people at the entrance," Louisa offered, instinctively adjusting the small white turban she wore as a headband, her own version of the symbol that now identified the movement created by her grandmother. At 23, the young woman had found her purpose as the communications coordinator for the White Turban Project. Her knowledge of digital media, combined with the sensitivity inherited from her grandmother, made her the perfect person to translate that cause to new generations. As guests arrived, authorities, journalists, representatives of partner institutions, Mrs. Evelyn put the finishing touches on her presentation. It was no longer just her personal story that would be told, but the collective journey of thousands of people who had been touched by the movement. "Mrs. Evelyn?" A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "May I come in?" Turning, the elderly woman saw Deborah standing at the door. Her hair, once dyed platinum blonde, now displayed its natural dark brown color. The makeup, once excessive, gave way to a simple and natural look. But the biggest transformation was in her eyes, the calculating and superficial gaze replaced by an expression of genuine serenity. "Deborah!" "What a wonderful surprise!" Mrs. Evelyn exclaimed, approaching for a warm hug. "I didn't know you were coming." "I arrived in London last night," the ex-influencer explained. "I couldn't miss the project's 6-month celebration, especially since—" she hesitated, biting her lower lip. "Well, because in a way it all started with me." The reunion between the two women attracted curious glances from those present. The story of the influencer who shaved her mother-in-law's head was still remembered, but now as a prelude to a much larger and more significant narrative. "How have you been?" Mrs. Evelyn asked, genuinely interested. "Well," Deborah replied with a shy smile, "the work at the elderly care home in Manchester has been transformative, and the gerontology course is fascinating. I'm learning so much. And social media?" Deborah laughed softly. "I'm still keeping my distance. I only maintain a professional profile, entirely focused on disseminating information about elder care and combating ageism. No filters, no poses, no exposed personal life." Graham, who watched the scene from a distance, felt a mixture of contradictory emotions. The marriage had definitively ended. Divorce papers were signed 3 months after the incident, but the initial resentment gradually gave way to a quiet acceptance of the role Deborah had played in his life, for better or worse. "Dad?" Louisa called, approaching discreetly. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's great," he assured, putting an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Just thinking about how life takes unexpected turns." The young woman followed his gaze to Deborah, the woman who for so long had been an obstacle in her relationship with her father. Taking a deep breath, she made a decision. "I'm going to say hello to her," she declared, surprising Graham. "Are you sure?" "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Louisa interrupted with determination. "Grandma taught me that holding grudges only harms ourselves. Besides, everyone deserves a second chance." As father and daughter approached Mrs. Evelyn and Deborah on the other side of the room, Josephine organized the buffet with her usual efficiency. The housekeeper, who had done so much to protect her employer on that fateful day, now held the official position of administrator of the White Turban Project, a promotion that recognized not only her loyalty, but also her remarkable organizational skills. "Mrs. Josephine," a young reporter approached her, "do you have a minute? I'd like to include you in the story about the project's behind the scenes." The housekeeper smiled, still uncomfortable with the attention she occasionally received. The video she had secretly recorded that Sunday was never released. Mrs. Evelyn had insisted it be kept, preferring the story to be told not by the recorded humiliation, but by the transformation that followed. "Of course," Josephine replied, wiping her hands on her apron, "but I don't have much to say. I just did what any person with a conscience would do." In the center of the hall, the meeting between Deborah and Louisa generated an expectant silence. The two women, separated by years of manipulation and absence, now faced each other with a mixture of apprehension and hope. "Hi, Louisa," Deborah greeted, uncertain how to proceed. "So you look beautiful." "Thank you," the young woman replied with restrained politeness. I heard you're studying gerontology. Yes, I'm in my second semester. It's fascinating how little we know about the aging process, even though it's universal. The conversation flowed, surprisingly natural, on safe and impersonal topics. There was no instant reconciliation. Some wounds require more than words to heal completely, but there was a beginning, a small bridge being built over the chasm that had separated them for so long. Graham watched the scene with a mixture of astonishment and admiration. His daughter, who would have every reason to hold a grudge, demonstrated an emotional maturity that he, at 45, still struggled to achieve. "She has a lot of you," Mrs. Evelyn commented, approaching silently. "The same inner strength, the same capacity to forgive." "I think she has more of you," he replied with a smile. "Thank goodness." The event began promptly at 3 in the afternoon. The improvised auditorium quickly filled, with people of all ages occupying the chairs arranged in a semicircle. In the front row, side by side, sat Graham, Louisa, Josephine, and, to the surprise of many, Deborah, a living symbol of the reconciliation the project promoted. Mrs. Evelyn ascended the small stage, adjusting the microphone to her height. Her white turban, now adorned with delicate golden embroidery, shone under the lights. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her serene voice filling the room. "We are here today to celebrate not just 6 months of a social project, but a journey of collective transformation that began in the most unexpected way." The presentation that followed blended concrete data on the impact of the White Turban Project, number of beneficiaries, cities reached, partnerships established, with deep reflections on dignity, intergenerational respect, and the danger of superficiality in a world increasingly digitally connected but emotionally distant. "Our society," Mrs. Evelyn observed at one point, "has developed a paradoxical relationship with aging. We spend fortunes trying to look younger while discarding the wisdom of those who have already walked the path we are only just beginning to tread." The words, spoken without bitterness or accusation, deeply touched those present. In Deborah's eyes, silent tears reflected the painful recognition of her own participation in the perpetuation of those distorted values. "But today," the elderly woman continued, her gaze sweeping the audience, "I see before me proof that it is possible to change this reality. Each one of you, regardless of age, carries the potential to build bridges between generations, to value experience without discarding innovation, to recognize that everyone, young and old, has something valuable to share." At the end of the ED presentation, the expansion of the project to 5 more British cities was announced, thanks to a partnership with the Department for Communities and local government. The White Turban Project, born from an act of cruelty transformed into an opportunity for awareness, consolidated itself as a public policy promoting intergenerational respect. The applause was warm and prolonged. Mrs. Evelyn, visibly moved, gestured, inviting Graham, Louisa, and Josephine to join her on stage. After a moment of hesitation, she also extended her hand to Deborah. "Come," she insisted when her former daughter-in-law hesitated. "You are also part of this story." The image of that improbable group, united on stage, was captured by dozens of cameras and phones. It was not a traditional family, nor a conventional team. It was a mosaic of people connected by shared experiences, by wounds transformed into learning, by conscious choices of overcoming. After the event, as guests circulated during the cocktail reception, Deborah discreetly approached Graham. It was the first time they had spoken alone since their separation. "Congratulations on the incredible work you're doing," she said sincerely. "Thank you," he replied, feeling strangely at ease. "And congratulations on your transformation. Louisa told me about the project you started in Manchester." Deborah nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "It's still small, just a group of young people regularly visiting care homes, but it's growing. If you need support from the Sterling Foundation, the doors are open." The offer, made without resentment or ulterior motives, surprised Deborah. "That would mean a lot. Thank you." On the other side of the room, Mrs. Evelyn observed the scene with serene satisfaction. Beside her, Louisa followed her gaze. You always knew this would happen, didn't you? The young woman asked, intrigued. From the beginning, when you called me and now inviting Deborah to the event. The elderly woman smiled enigmatically. Let's say age gives us a certain clarity about human nature. We all make mistakes, Louisa. What defines our character are not the mistakes themselves, but what we do after them. As the afternoon drew to a close and guests began to say goodbye, Josephine approached Mrs. Evelyn with a worried expression. Mrs. Evelyn, you don't look well. You're pale. Just tired, my dear, the elderly woman reassured her, though an attentive observer might notice the slight tremor in her hands. It was an emotional day. Let's go home, Graham decided, also noticing his mother's fatigue. You need to rest. On the way back to the penthouse on the South Bank, in the comfortable back seat of the SUV driven by the family chauffeur, Mrs. Evelyn kept her eyes closed, enjoying the silence after hours of intense social interaction. Grandma, Louisa called softly. May I ask you something? Of course, my dear. You never told us exactly why you chose a white turban. Why not another color or another accessory, Mrs.? Evelyn opened her eyes, a gentle smile illuminating her tired face. White for me has always represented new beginnings, purity of intentions, she explained. When I saw myself with a shaved head, I could have chosen to hide what happened. I could have victimized myself or isolated myself in shame. Instead, I decided to transform that moment into a new beginning. Graham, who listened attentively from the front seat, felt a lump in his throat. His mother, who had spent her entire life prioritizing others, first her husband, then her son, now her granddaughter, was finally receiving the recognition she deserved. Besides, Mrs. Evelyn continued with a touch of humor in her eyes, white goes with everything. I've always been practical, you know. The laughter that followed eased the emotional density of the moment, allowing the conversation to flow to lighter topics for the rest of the journey. In the penthouse, as Josephine prepared afternoon tea, Mrs. Evelyn carefully removed the white turban, revealing her silver hair that now grew uniformly, framing her face with a softness that contrasted with the strength of her spirit. You? No? She commented to Louisa, who was helping her settle into her favorite armchair. Perhaps soon I won't need to wear the turban anymore. My hair is growing back well. But the symbol will remain, the young woman replied, kneeling beside her grandmother. What you built goes far beyond an accessory. On the balcony, contemplating the sunset that painted the Thames estuary golden, Graham received an unexpected call. It was Edward, the young journalist from the neighboring apartment who had written the first article about the incident 6 months ago. Mr. Sterling? Sorry to bother you, but I wanted to let you know I've been invited to cover the expansion of the White Turban project to northern England. I thought you'd want to know. That's excellent, Edward. No one better than you who has followed the story from the beginning. Actually, the young man continued, I'm thinking of writing a book about this whole journey. With your family's permission, of course. The proposal caught Graham by surprise. A book? Well, I'd have to talk to my mother and... Tell him yes, Mrs. Evelyn interjected, who had approached silently, leaning on Louisa's arm. Stories like ours need to be recorded, not out of vanity, but for the good they can do. That night, as the Sterling family dined peacefully, celebrating the success of the event and planning the project's next steps, Deborah returned to her Notting Hill hotel. On the bedside table, a formal invitation to join the advisory board of the Sterling Foundation, discreetly delivered by Graham at the end of the event. Beside it, her phone vibrated with a notification. It was a message from Louisa. Thank you for coming today. It meant a lot to Grandma, and to me too. Simple as that. No grand promises of instant reconciliation, no guarantee that all wounds were healed. Just a small step towards a future where resentment gave way to mutual respect. In the Sterling penthouse before going to bed, Mrs. Evelyn paused in front of the mirror. Her silver hair, now free of the turban, reflected the soft light of the bedside lamp. With delicate fingers, she touched the growing strands, feeling their texture. "Mum," Graham called from the door, "do you need anything?" She turned, a serene smile illuminating her face. "No, my son, I have everything I need. And she did, truly. A reunited family, a purpose greater than herself. The peaceful conscience of someone who transforms pain into wisdom, humiliation into dignity, an end into a new beginning. The white turban rested carefully folded on the dressing table, no longer a necessity, but a symbol. A silent reminder that sometimes one must lose something valuable to discover what is truly essential. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Mrs. Evelyn's and her family's journey has touched your heart. To follow more emotional stories like this, we have prepared a special playlist that explores family bonds and the wisdom that only time provides. Find it by clicking the link to the left of this screen. If the white turban story sparked emotions and reflections in you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Daily, we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity of British life in its various facets. We want to know your opinion. Have you ever witnessed situations where the search for validation on social media crossed ethical boundaries? Share your experience in the comments. Our next story is already being prepared, and we promise more emotions and reflections. See you soon.